The elevator doors slid shut with their familiar whisper, sealing CEO Landon Pierce into what should have been another ordinary ride to the 52nd floor. But today, a small voice piped up from the corner where a 6-year-old girl sat cross-legged on the marble floor, her dark curls bouncing as she looked up at him with bright, fearless eyes. "Are you the boss of this whole building?" she asked, as if she had every right to be there. What happened next would shatter everything Landon thought he knew about success, purpose, and the invisible people who kept his empire running. Because sometimes the most powerful revelations come from the smallest voices, and sometimes a chance encounter can rewrite the entire story of your life. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Landon Pierce had built his reputation on precision, control, and an unwavering dedication to the bottom line that had transformed Pierce Industries from a modest construction firm into a multinational empire worth over $2 billion. At 38, he commanded respect from boardrooms in Manhattan to conference halls in Tokyo, his steel-gray eyes and perfectly tailored suits serving as armor against a world that demanded nothing less than excellence. This Tuesday morning in March started like every other, with his driver depositing him at the marble entrance of the Pierce Tower at exactly 7:45. Allowing him precisely 15 minutes to review his schedule before the day's first meeting. The elevator reserved for executive use was his sanctuary, a polished steel chamber that carried him from the chaos of the lobby to the quiet authority of his corner office. For 8 years, those 37 seconds of vertical travel had been his moment of transition, the bridge between the man who occasionally doubted himself and the CEO who never showed weakness. The doors slid open with their usual mechanical precision, and Landon stepped inside, his fingers already reaching for the 52nd floor button when he froze. A little girl sat in the corner of his elevator, her small form almost lost against the expanse of polished marble flooring. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with coffee-colored skin that seemed to glow under the elevator's soft lighting and dark curls that escaped from what had once been a neat ponytail. Her clothes were clean but clearly inexpensive, a purple sweater with small flowers embroidered along the collar, and jeans that had been carefully mended at the knee. Most striking were her eyes, large and warm, and completely unafraid as they met his gaze. "Hello," she said with the casual confidence that only children possess, as if finding a stranger in an elevator was the most natural thing in the world. "Are you the boss of this whole building?" Landon's first instinct was to call security, to demand an explanation for how a child had accessed his private elevator, to restore order to a morning that had suddenly veered into the realm of the impossible. But something about her steady gaze and the way she sat so perfectly still, as if she belonged exactly where she was, made him pause. He glanced at the control panel, noting that someone had already pressed the button for the 38th floor, and felt his carefully constructed morning schedule beginning to crumble. I am, he found himself saying, his voice gentler than he'd intended. "And you are?" "Sophie Delgado," she announced with the same formal precision he might use in a board meeting. "I'm 6 years old, and I live in apartment 4B with my mom. She's cleaning your floor so I won't be scared alone." The words hit him with unexpected force, carrying implications that his analytical mind immediately began to process. A cleaning woman's daughter, somehow left unsupervised in his building, finding her way into an elevator that required a special key card to access. The security breach alone should have sent him into a fury of calls to department heads and demands for immediate explanations. Instead, he found himself studying this small girl who spoke with such matter-of-fact honesty about being afraid to be alone. "Your mom is cleaning the 38th floor?" he asked, pressing the button to stop the elevator between floors. Sophie nodded gravely, her small hands folded in her lap with a composure that seemed far too mature for her age. She cleans at night usually, but today they asked her to come early because there's a big meeting. She didn't want to leave me at home by myself, but she can't afford the babysitter anymore since Mrs. Rodriguez moved away. Sophie's explanation came without a trace of self-pity or embarrassment, simply the practical recounting of facts as she understood them. She told me to wait in the lobby, but it's really loud down there and there are so many people. I got scared and found this elevator that was quieter. Landon felt something twist in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that took him a moment to identify his guilt. How many times had he ridden this elevator without thinking about the people who cleaned his offices, who emptied his trash cans and polished his conference tables while he was safely at home? How many Carla Delgados worked in his building, struggling with impossible choices between keeping their jobs and caring for their children? "How did you get the elevator to work?" he asked, genuinely curious. The executive elevator required a special access card that only a handful of people possessed. Sophie's face brightened with pride. "I watched the lady with the cart. She had a special card that she touched to the wall, and then the doors opened. When she wasn't looking, I touched my mom's work badge to the same spot, and it worked too." Her smile faded slightly. "I hope I didn't break anything. My mom says I'm not supposed to touch things that don't belong to me." The innocence of her confession struck him deeply. She'd essentially hacked his security system through simple observation and childhood curiosity, yet her only concern was whether she'd caused any damage. He thought of his own childhood, raised in privilege and comfort, never having to worry about being left alone or whether his parents could afford childcare. The contrast between his experiences and Sophie's current reality felt like a chasm he'd never fully appreciated. "You didn't break anything," he assured her, settling against the elevator wall as he realized this conversation was far from over. "Tell me about your mom. What's her name?" "Carla Delgado. She's the best mom in the whole world," Sophie said with the absolute certainty that children reserve for their deepest truths. "She works really hard to take care of me. She cleans this building and 2 other ones, and sometimes she helps at the restaurant on weekends. She's always tired, but she still reads me stories before bed and helps me with my homework." Each detail felt like a small indictment of the world Landon had built around himself, insulated from the struggles of people like Carla Delgado, who worked multiple jobs just to survive. He found himself wondering when he'd last thought about the janitors and cleaning staff as anything more than necessary but invisible components of his business operations. When had he stopped seeing them as individuals with families and dreams and challenges that extended far beyond the scope of their employment? "She sounds wonderful," he said, meaning it more than he'd expected to. "Are you in school, Sophie?" Her face lit up with enthusiasm. "Yes, I'm in 1st grade at Lincoln Elementary. I love to read, and I'm really good at math. My teacher, Miss Patterson, says I'm one of her best students. My mom helps me practice every night, even when she's really tired from work." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Sometimes I have to do my homework by myself, though, because Mom has to work late. She leaves me dinner and tells me to lock the door and not answer it for anyone." The image of a 6-year-old girl sitting alone in an apartment, dutifully doing homework while her mother worked late into the night, created a sharp ache in Landon's chest. He thought of his own evening routine, returning to his penthouse apartment where a housekeeper had prepared his dinner and a personal assistant had organized his schedule for the following day. The luxury of choice, of having support systems and safety nets, had been so ingrained in his life that he'd forgotten what it meant to navigate the world without them. "That sounds lonely," he said gently. Sophie shrugged with the practiced resilience of a child who'd learned to adapt to circumstances beyond her control. "Sometimes, but Mom says we're a team, and team members help each other even when it's hard. She says if I'm brave and responsible when she's working, then she can keep her jobs and we can stay in our apartment." The weight of responsibility this little girl carried, the way she'd internalized her role in her family's survival, struck Landon as both admirable and heartbreaking. At 6 years old, she understood economic pressure and the fragile nature of financial security in ways that many adults never had to contemplate. Her bravery wasn't the kind celebrated in boardrooms or featured in business magazines. It was the quiet, daily courage of a child adapting to circumstances that should never have been hers to navigate. "You are very brave," he told her, and saw her face brighten with pride at the recognition. "And very smart, too, figuring out how to work the elevator." "Thank you," she said politely. "Are you nice to my mom when you see her?" Sometimes people aren't very nice to her because she cleans things. But cleaning is important work. If nobody cleaned, everything would be dirty and smelly and germy. Her innocent question cut through him like a blade. When was the last time he'd actually seen any of the cleaning staff? They work during off hours precisely to remain invisible, to perform their duties without disrupting the daily operations of the business. He couldn't remember ever having a conversation with any of them, couldn't recall their names or faces or anything about their lives beyond their function in keeping his building operational. Realization that he might walk past Carla Delgado every day without acknowledging her existence felt like a profound failure of basic human decency. "I think I need to meet your mom," he said, reaching for the elevator controls. "Would that be okay with you?" Sophie nodded eagerly. She would like that. She always says it's important to be polite to everyone, even important people like you. "Even important people like you." The phrase echoed in his mind as the elevator began its ascent to the 38th floor. In Sophie's worldview, he was someone to be treated with politeness and respect, but not someone to be feared or revered. Just another person deserving of basic courtesy. No more or less valuable than her hard-working mother or her dedicated teacher or anyone else who played a role in her small but meaningful world. The elevator doors opened onto the 38th floor, revealing the familiar layout of cubicles and conference rooms that housed his marketing department. The overhead lights were dimmed to half power, creating the subdued atmosphere typical of early morning hours before the regular staff arrived. The soft sound of a vacuum cleaner hummed from somewhere deeper in the office space, accompanied by the occasional clink of cleaning supplies being moved from one area to another. Sophie immediately perked up at the familiar sounds. "That's my mom," she said with confidence, scrambling to her feet with the energy of a child who'd been sitting still for too long. "She's probably almost done with the big conference room. She always saves that for last because it takes the longest to clean properly." Landon followed Sophie through the maze of cubicles, noting details about his own office space that he'd never paid attention to before. The way the morning light filtered through the large windows, casting geometric patterns across the carpeted pathways. The personal touches that employees had added to their workstations. Small photos and plants and decorations that transformed generic corporate furniture into individual expressions of personality. The meticulous cleanliness of every surface, from the dust-free computer monitors to the perfectly arranged stacks of papers. Evidence of work that happened in the quiet hours when the building belonged to people like Carla Delgado. They found her in the large conference room at the end of the hall. A woman in her early 30s with the same warm brown eyes as her daughter and hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore the standard-issue uniform of the cleaning company, navy blue pants and a matching polo shirt with the Pierce Industries logo embroidered on the chest. Her movements were efficient and practiced as she wiped down the long mahogany conference table, paying careful attention to each chair and the gleaming surface that reflected the early morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mama!" Sophie called out, running toward her mother with the unbridled joy of a child reuniting with her favorite person in the world. Carla Delgado looked up at the sound of her daughter's voice, and Landon watched as her expression shifted from surprise to confusion to what he could only describe as barely contained panic. Her gaze moved from Sophie to Landon, and he saw her immediately straighten. her professional composure sliding into place like armor as she registered the presence of someone who could only be management. "Sophie, what are you doing up here?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled but tinged with the kind of worry that every working parent understood. "I told you to wait in the lobby." "I got scared, Mama." It was too loud, and there were too many people. "I found the quiet elevator, and this nice man was in it, and we talked, and he wanted to meet you." Sophie's explanation tumbled out in the rush of words typical of excited children, innocent of the professional implications of her adventure. Carla's eyes met Landon's over her daughter's head, and he saw the calculation happening behind her professional mask. She was trying to assess the situation, to determine how much trouble her daughter's unauthorized presence might cause, to figure out how to minimize any potential damage to her employment. The fear in her expression was subtle but unmistakable. The carefully hidden terror of someone whose livelihood depended on maintaining invisibility and avoiding any attention that might be construed as problematic. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious stress. "Sophie wasn't supposed to be up here. I told her to wait downstairs, but she must have gotten confused. It won't happen again." The apology struck Landon as both heartbreaking and infuriating, not because of anything Carla had done wrong, but because her first instinct was to assume blame and minimize her presence. How many conversations like this had she endured throughout her working life? How many times had she been made to feel that her existence, her struggles, her very humanity were inconveniences to be managed rather than realities to be acknowledged and respected? "Please don't apologize," he said, his voice gentler than he'd intended. "Sophie hasn't done anything wrong. In fact, she's been excellent company. I'm Landon Pierce." He saw the recognition flicker across Carla's features as she processed his name, the understanding that she was speaking not just to management, but to the owner of the building, the man whose name was etched in gold letters in the lobby 40 floors below. Her composure remained intact, but he noticed the slight trembling in her hands as she set down her cleaning cloth and moved closer to her daughter. "Mr. Pierce," she said with a professionalism that spoke to years of experience navigating conversations with people who held her economic fate in their hands. "I'm Carla Delgado. I work for Pristine Commercial Cleaning Services. I understand this is highly irregular, and I take full responsibility for my daughter's presence in the building." "How long have you been cleaning this building, Mrs. Delgado?" he asked, ignoring her formal apology and focusing on the information he suddenly realized he should have known all along. 3 years, sir. I typically work the evening shift, but we were asked to come in early today to prepare for a board meeting. My regular childcare arrangement fell through, and I didn't have anyone else to watch Sophie. I thought she would be safe in the lobby until I finished my rounds." The clinical way she recounted the facts of her situation struck him as both admirable and heartbreaking. No complaints about the impossible position she'd been placed in. No requests for sympathy or understanding. Just the straightforward explanation of a woman doing her best to balance competing responsibilities with limited resources and fewer options. "Tell me about your work," he said, settling into one of the conference room chairs and gesturing for both Carla and Sophie to sit as well. "What does your schedule look like?" Carla hesitated, clearly uncertain about the purpose of his questions, but unwilling to refuse a direct request from the building's owner. She perched on the edge of a chair, maintaining the posture of someone ready to resume work at a moment's notice, while Sophie climbed into the seat beside her with the comfortable familiarity of a child who belonged wherever her mother was. "I work for Pristine from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., Monday through Friday," she began, her voice taking on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to explaining her circumstances to authority figures. "I clean 3 floors of this building, plus I have contracts with 2 smaller office buildings downtown. On weekends, I sometimes pick up shifts at Rose's restaurant on 5th Street, helping with catering prep and special events." Landon found himself doing quick mental calculations, estimating the hours and wages involved in such a schedule, even accounting for overtime and weekend work. The numbers painted a picture of someone working 60 to 70 hours per week just to maintain basic financial stability. The thought of maintaining such a pace while also raising a 6-year-old daughter alone seemed overwhelming. "That's a substantial workload," he said. "What time do you typically get home?" "Around 2:30 in the morning, usually." Sophie is asleep by then, but I still check on her homework from the day before and lay out her clothes for school. She's very independent for her age, very responsible about getting herself ready in the morning and walking to school. Sophie beamed with pride at her mother's praise. But Landon felt another stab of concern at the image of a first grader managing her morning routine alone, while her exhausted mother caught a few hours of sleep before starting the cycle again. The logistical challenges of such an arrangement seemed almost impossible to sustain long-term. "What about school events, parent-teacher conferences, that sort of thing?" he asked. For the first time, Carla's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of the exhaustion and frustration that she normally, quote, kept carefully hidden. "It's difficult," she admitted. "Sophie's teacher is very understanding, and we try to schedule meetings during my lunch break when possible. But there are things I miss sometimes, school plays and field day and parent volunteer opportunities. Sophie understands that I have to work, but I know she wishes I could be there more often." Sophie reached over and took her mother's hand, a gesture so natural and comforting that it spoke to the depth of their bond and the way they'd learned to support each other through circumstances that no family should have to navigate alone. "It's okay, Mama," she said with the same mature composure she'd shown in the elevator. "I know you're working hard to take care of us." The exchange between mother and daughter created a profound silence in the conference room, broken only by the distant sounds of the city waking up far below. Landon found himself thinking about his own relationship with his parents, successful professionals who had always been able to attend his school events, who had never missed a graduation or award ceremony or important milestone. The luxury of presence, of being able to prioritize family moments over economic survival, was something he'd always taken for granted. "Mrs. Delgado," he said finally, "what would your ideal situation look like? If you could design your work life to better support your family, what would that involve?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, as if the concept of designing her circumstances rather than simply enduring them was foreign to her experience. She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her considering whether honesty was safe in this context, whether expressing wants and needs might somehow jeopardize the precarious stability she'd managed to create. "I suppose," she said slowly, "I would love to have work that allowed me to be home when Sophie gets back from school, to help her with homework and hear about her day while it's still fresh in her mind, to attend school events and volunteer in her classroom, and be the kind of mother who knows all her friends' names and can drive them to birthday parties." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, as if speaking these dreams aloud was giving them weight and substance. "I would want work that used more of my skills, that challenged me and gave me room to grow. Before Sophie was born, I was studying business administration at the community college. I had to drop out when her father left, and I needed to work full-time. But I always thought I might go back someday." Landon absorbed this information, building a mental picture of a woman whose potential had been constrained by circumstances beyond her control. How many other Carla Delgados were there in his building, in his company? In the broader community, how many people were trapped in cycles of survival that prevented them from accessing opportunities that might transform not only their own lives, but the lives of their children? What if I told you that I might have a position available that could address some of those concerns? He said, the idea forming even as he spoke. Something during regular business hours, with benefits and opportunities for advancement and access to professional development resources? Carla's eyes widened, and he saw hope flicker across her features before caution reasserted itself. "Mr. Pierce, I appreciate the consideration, but I don't have the qualifications for an office position. I didn't finish college, and my work experience is primarily in cleaning and food service. Some of the most valuable employees I've ever known started in positions that didn't require formal education," he said, thinking of his own journey from entry-level construction worker to CEO, a path that had been possible because someone had been willing to take a chance on his potential rather than just his credentials. What matters more is character, work ethic, and the ability to learn and grow. From what I've observed this morning, you possess all of those qualities in abundance. Sophie had been listening to the conversation with the intense focus that children reserve for discussions that might affect their world, and now she looked up at her mother with bright eyes. "Does this mean you might not have to work at night anymore, Mama?" The hope in her daughter's voice seemed to break through Carla's professional restraint, and tears gathered in her eyes as she struggled to maintain her composure. "We don't know yet, sweetheart. Mr. Pierce is just talking about possibilities right now." "Actually," Landon said, his decision crystallizing as he watched the interaction between mother and daughter, "I'm talking about something more concrete than possibilities. Pierce Industries has been looking for someone to coordinate our corporate social responsibility initiatives, particularly our community outreach and employee support programs. It's a newly created position that would involve developing programs to support working families, coordinating with local schools and community organizations, and helping to create more inclusive policies within our company." He paused, watching Carla's expression as she processed this information. The salary would be $65,000 annually, plus full benefits including health insurance and tuition reimbursement if choose to continue your education. The hours would be Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., with occasional evening events as needed. The figures hung in the air between them, representing not just a job offer, but a complete transformation of their family's economic reality. $65,000 was likely more than Carla currently earned working 3 different jobs, and the benefits alone would provide security and opportunities that had been beyond their reach. "I don't understand," Carla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you offer this to me? You don't know anything about me except that I clean your building and my daughter ended up in your elevator." It was a fair question, and one that Landon found himself considering seriously. Why was he making this offer? Was it guilt over his own privilege and blind spots? Pity for their situation? A sudden attack of conscience about the invisible people who kept his empire functioning? As he looked at Sophie, still holding her mother's hand and watching the conversation with bright, hopeful eyes, he realized that his motivation was simpler and more profound than any of those options. He was making this offer because it was the right thing to do, because he had the power to transform their lives and no good reason not to use that power. Because sometimes the most important business decisions were actually moral decisions dressed up in professional language. Because, he said slowly, "I think you're exactly the kind of person we need in that position. Someone who understands what it means to work hard for everything you have, who knows what challenges working families face, who has demonstrated incredible resilience and creativity in managing difficult circumstances. Your lived experience is precisely the qualification that matters most for this role." Carla was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her struggling to believe that such an opportunity could be real, that her life could change so dramatically in the space of a single conversation. "What about Sophie?" she asked finally. "I would still need childcare after school and during breaks and when she's sick." "Pierce Industries has an on-site childcare facility," Landon said, remembering the amenity that had been installed several years earlier, primarily to attract high-level executives who needed support balancing career and family responsibilities. "It's available to all employees, and they have after-school programs and summer camps. Sophie would be welcome there anytime you need support." Sophie's face lit up with excitement. Would there be other kids there, Mama? Could I make new friends? There would definitely be other children, Landon assured her. And they have homework help and art programs and lots of activities. You might really enjoy it. The transformation in both their faces was remarkable to witness. The careful tension that had defined Carla's posture since she'd first seen him in the conference room was gradually giving way to something that looked cautiously like hope. Sophie was practically bouncing in her chair with excitement about the possibility of having other children to play with during the long hours she typically spent alone. Mr. Pierce, Carla said, her voice steadier now but still tinged with disbelief. I don't know what to say. This is more than I ever imagined possible. But I have to ask, what happens if it doesn't work out? If I'm not qualified? Or if I make mistakes? I can't afford to lose my current jobs unless I'm certain this is stable. Her caution was entirely reasonable, and Landon respected her for asking the difficult questions rather than simply accepting an offer that seemed too good to be true. We'll structure it so that you have security, he said. You can start next Monday with a 90-day trial period. During that time, you'll keep your evening cleaning position as backup, and we'll adjust your schedule so you can manage both temporarily. If after 90 days we're both satisfied that it's a good fit, you can transition to the new role full-time. If not, you'll still have your original position and no harm done. The practical nature of his proposal seemed to resonate with Carla's careful approach to major decisions. She nodded slowly, and he could see her mental wheels turning as she considered the logistics and possibilities. What would my responsibilities include exactly? Initially, you'd be working with our HR department to assess our current employee support programs and identify gaps where we could better serve working ally families. You'd research best practices from other companies, coordinate with local organizations that provide services to families in need, and help design programs that could make a real difference in people's lives. Eventually, you might oversee implementation of new policies around flexible scheduling, emergency childcare support, tuition assistance, things like that. As he described the role, Landon realized that he was essentially asking Carla to help him solve the exact problems that her own life exemplified. Who better to design support programs for working parents than someone who had navigated those challenges herself? Who better to identify the gaps in corporate policies than someone who had experienced firsthand what it meant to fall through those gaps? It sounds like meaningful work, Carla said, and he heard genuine interest in her voice for the first time. Work that could help other families like ours. Exactly. And as you grow into the role, there would be opportunities for advancement, for additional education and training, for increasing responsibility and compensation. I'm not offering you just a job, Mrs. Delgado. I'm offering you a career path. Sophie had been following the conversation with remarkable attention for a 6-year-old, and now she looked up at her mother with shining eyes. Mama, does this mean we won't have to worry about money anymore? Does this mean you won't be so tired all the time? The questions, asked with the innocent directness that only children possess, seemed to crystallize the magnitude of what was being offered. This wasn't just about a job or a salary increase. It was about the possibility of breaking free from the exhausting cycle of survival that had defined their lives for years. It was about Sophie having a mother who was present and rested and able to participate fully in her childhood. It was about Carla having the space to dream beyond the next rent payment or grocery bill. It might mean exactly that, sweetheart, Carla said, her voice thick with emotion. If Mr. Pierce is serious about this offer, it could change everything for us. I'm absolutely serious, Landon assured her. In fact, I'd like you to come back tomorrow morning to meet with our HR director and tour the childcare facility. We can work out all the details and get you started as soon as possible. Carla nodded, wiping away tears that she'd been trying to hold back. Thank you, she said simply. I don't have adequate words to express what this means to us, but thank you. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Sophie ran over to Landon and surprised him by wrapping her small arms around his waist in an enthusiastic hug. "Thank you for being nice to my mama," she said, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. "You're a good person." The simple declaration, offered with the absolute certainty that children bring to their assessments of character, affected him more profoundly than any business accolade or professional recognition he'd ever received. When was the last time someone had evaluated him not on his net worth or his company's stock performance, but on his basic human decency? As he watched Carla and Sophie walk toward the elevator, hand in hand, and talking excitedly about their changed future, Landon felt something shift inside him. The priorities that had driven him for years, the relentless focus on profit margins and market dominance, suddenly seemed incomplete. What good was building an empire if it was populated by invisible people struggling to survive? What was the point of success if it came at the cost of ignoring the human reality of the people who made that success possible? He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, canceling his morning meetings and asking her to set up appointments with the heads of HR, operations, and community relations. If Carla Delgado was going to help him design better support systems for working families, he wanted to understand exactly what they were working with currently and where the biggest opportunities for improvement existed. Over the following weeks, as Carla settled into her new role and Sophie thrived in the after-Tau school program, Landon found himself viewing his company through entirely different eyes. The casual conversations he began having with employees at all levels revealed stories similar to Carla's, tales of people juggling multiple jobs, struggling with childcare, foregoing medical treatment because they couldn't afford time off work, choosing between rent payments and their children's school supplies. The corporate social responsibility program that Carla developed became a model for other companies, featuring on-site childcare, emergency financial assistance funds, flexible scheduling options, and partnerships with local colleges to provide tuition support for employees seeking additional education. But more than the specific programs, what changed was the culture of the company itself. The recognition that the people who cleaned the offices and staffed the security desks and maintained the facilities were not just service providers but human beings, deserving of dignity, respect, and opportunities for advancement. Sophie became something of a mascot for the child care center, her enthusiasm and curiosity infectious among the other children and staff. Her academic performance improved dramatically once she had consistent support with homework and regular meals. And her confidence blossomed as she made friends and participated in activities that had been beyond her reach when she was managing so much of her routine alone. 6 months after their encounter in the elevator, Landon received a hand-drawn card from Sophie featuring a crayon drawing of the two of them standing together in what was unmistakably an elevator. The message, written in careful first-grade printing, read, "Thank you for listening to me and helping my mama. You are the best boss ever." He kept the card framed on his desk, a daily reminder of the moment when a 6-year-old girl in an elevator had taught him that the most important measure of success wasn't profit or productivity, but the impact you had on the lives of the people around you. Sometimes the most transformative conversations happened in the most unexpected places, and sometimes the smallest voices carried the most profound truths. The Pierce Industries annual report that year featured a new section dedicated to employee welfare initiatives, with photographs of the child care center and testimonials from working parents about how the new programs had affected their families. But Landon's favorite part of the report was a small photograph of Carla Delgado at her desk, working on a proposal for expanding mental health support services, with Sophie visible in the background at the child care center, helping a younger child with a puzzle. It was a perfect encapsulation of what he'd learned from their chance encounter: that businesses didn't exist in isolation from the human lives they touched, that the people who kept companies running deserved more than just paychecks and basic respect, and that sometimes the most important investments were the ones that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports but in the smiles of children and the dignity of their parents. The elevator continued to carry him to the 52nd floor each morning, but now, those 37 seconds of vertical travel served a different purpose. Instead of being a transition between his private doubts and his public confidence, they became a daily reminder of the responsibility that came with power and the opportunities that existed to use that power for something more meaningful than personal enrichment. And sometimes, when the elevator stopped at the 38th floor and Carla stepped in with reports to deliver or meetings to attend, Sophie would be with her, chattering about school or friends or the book she was reading. In those moments, watching this little girl who had accidentally wandered into his carefully controlled world and changed everything about how he understood success, Landon was reminded that the most important conversations often happened when you least expected them, and that listening to the smallest voices could lead to the biggest transformations. The story of their meeting became something of a legend within Pierce Industries, told and retold as an example of how chance encounters could reshape not just individual lives, but entire corporate cultures. New employees heard about the CEO who discovered his company's most valuable programs by talking to a 6-year-old in an elevator. And long-term staff members pointed to the changes that followed as evidence that leadership willing to listen and learn could transform any organization. But for Landon, the most meaningful part of the story wasn't its impact on company culture or employee satisfaction scores. It was the simple recognition that every person he encountered, from the executives in his boardroom to the children in his building's childcare center, had something to teach him if he was willing to listen. The little girl in the elevator wasn't supposed to be there, but her presence had been exactly what he needed to understand that true success was measured not in dollars or market share, but in the dignity and opportunities extended to every person whose life intersected with his work.